Today, we are diving deep into the British coronation. We're talking about a ceremony that has managed to survive for nearly 1,000 years through wars, massive social shifts, and just about everything else you can imagine. So, how on earth did it last this long? Let's get into it. 957 years. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's how long it's been between the very first coronation we have on record at Westminster Abbey and the most recent one for King Charles III. It's almost impossible to think of any other single ceremony that has endured for that long. So that's the big question, right? How does something like this survive for nearly a millennium? Well, the secret isn't that it stayed the same. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's a story about how this one spectacular event has constantly changed and adapted to the world around it. All right, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Now, these early coronations, they were not these slick, polished productions we see on TV. They were raw, they were often pretty chaotic, and they were absolutely vital in building the very idea of what a kingdom was. It all kicks off right here, Christmas Day, 1066. William the Conqueror has just won the Battle of Hastings, and he's crowned at Westminster Abbey. And that one decision, right then and there, sets the stage, literally. Every single coronation from that point forward happens in that same building. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but it's a huge deal. Early on, monarchs were called the King of the English. They were the leader of a group of people. But then Edward I changes it to King of England. See the difference? It's not just about the people anymore. It's about ruling the land itself. That's a massive shift in how the monarchy sees itself. And Edward I didn't just stop at a title change. He made this idea physical. He had this very chair built, the coronation chair, for one specific reason: to hold the Stone of Scone. That stone was a super important symbol of Scottish royalty, which he had just taken. So the chair, used for the first time for his son, becomes this permanent, in-your-face symbol of English power over the whole island. But, this connection to the land wasn't always so deep and meaningful. Take Richard the Lionheart. He famously said he'd sell London if he could just find someone to buy it. Why? He needed cash for his crusades. It's a pretty stark reminder that for a lot of these early kings, the kingdom was basically a giant ATM for their own projects. And just like the idea of the kingdom was changing, so was its sound. For centuries after the Normans invaded, the official language of the court was French. Henry IV started to change that. He began doing royal business in English. But the real moment of change was in 1461. That's when Edward IV's coronation was done, from start to finish in English. The language of the everyday person had finally become the language of the king. So, as we move forward in time, the basic traditions of the coronation really start to lock into place. But this is also where things get really interesting, because the personalities of the individual monarchs, some of them pretty eccentric, start leaving their own unique fingerprints all over these ancient rituals. You can really see this shift from the medieval to the modern world in this series of lasts. Charles II was the last king to show up to his coronation in a full suit of armor. I mean, can you imagine? James II was the last Catholic monarch to get the crown. And William and Mary, they had the last, and actually the only, joint coronation. The ceremony was definitely shedding its old skin. Okay, this is one of my favorite facts. If you're a soccer fan, you've totally heard a piece of coronation music. You know that epic anthem for the UEFA Champions League? Well, it's actually an adaptation of a piece called Zadok the Priest, which Handel wrote way back in 1727 for King George II's coronation, and they've used it in every single one since. How wild is that? And speaking of personalities leaving their mark, let's talk about King George IV. This guy was all about luxury. His coronation back in 1821 was by far the most expensive in history. The cost in today's money would be over £21 million. We're talking diamond-covered robes, a massive feast. He went all out. And then, talk about whiplash. His successor, William IV, was the complete opposite. He hated all the pomp and circumstance so much that his team literally had to convince him to even have a coronation. His was so basic and cheap that people started calling it the penny coronation. It just shows you how much the whole vibe could change depending on who was next in line. And then you get these amazing, just really human moments. Queen Victoria was the very first monarch to ever be photographed. But when she saw the picture, she realized she had blinked. And her reaction was not very queenly. She got so frustrated that she took something sharp and literally scratched her own face out of the photo. I mean, who can't relate to that? So this brings us into the modern era, into the moment when the coronation stopped being just a thing for the nation. Thanks to technology, it became a massive global show watched by hundreds of millions and then billions of people. Just look at how fast things change in the 20th century. In 1902, Edward VII gets to his coronation in a car. Wow. Just 9 years later, George V's ceremony gets filmed. Then, in 1937, George VI is broadcast live on the radio. And then, the big one, the absolute game changer. 1953, Elizabeth II's coronation is on television. Suddenly, the ancient ceremony inside the abbey was beamed into living rooms all over the planet. And the impact of that was just mind-blowing. The radio broadcast in 37 reached a huge audience, about 20 million people. But just 16 years later, television didn't just double that audience, it multiplied it by more than 10 times over. The relationship between the monarch and the people was changed forever. It wasn't just for the elites anymore, it was a primetime global event. When you look at it all, it's clear the British coronation isn't some dusty relic. It's a living thing that has soaked up and reflected 1,000 years of history. And that brings us to the present day. In our world of instant news and social media, what does a ceremony this old really mean? What's its place? That's definitely something to think about.